Hoy vamos a estudiar los nombres de los libros de la Torá. El primero se llama Bereshit, con el Principado los cielos y tierra creó. El segundo se llama Shemot, son los nombres de los hijos de Israel que a Egipto descendieron y luego Elohim los liberó. La Torá es un regalo del Eterno para estudiar. Tiene muchos tesoros que encontrar. Vamos todos a estudiar la Torá. El tercero se llama Baikra. El Eterno llamó a Moisés, pues quería acercarse al pueblo de Israel. El cuarto
Shalom,
se
¿se escucha
llama Bemidbar. En la estepa Israel peregrinó y muchas pruebas pasaron ahí, pero el Eterno nunca los dejó. La Torá es un regalo del Eterno para estudiar. Tiene muchos tesoros que encontrar. Vamos todos a estudiar la Torá. La Torá es un regalo del Eterno para estudiar. Tiene muchos tesoros que encontrar. Vamos todos a estudiar la Torá. El quinto se llama Devarim, son las palabras que el Eterno repitió a una nueva generación, y así en su tierra pudieran habitar. La Torá es un regalo del Eterno para estudiar. Tiene muchos tesoros que encontrar. Vamos todos a estudiar la Torá. La Torá es un regalo del Eterno para estudiar. Tiene muchos tesoros que encontrar. Vamos todos a estudiar la Torá. Vamos todos a estudiar la Torá. Vamos todos a estudiar la Torá.
Cielo Nuevo Niños presents My Little Manna.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
morning, afternoon, or night in the place where you are, my friends. We hope you're having a blessed Shabbat as a family. Today is our 11th delivery from the series called My Little Manna. Thank you for participating. We will greet you and then to the announcement. Shabbat Shalom to Valentina Lopez, Jax y Yona Rocha, Shirley Miranda, Mari Vázquez, Amada S., María Grijalva, Juana Márquez, Jackie Luz, Luis Luz, Lázaro Cano Villalobos, Mari Vázquez, Blanca Castañeda, Shabbat Shalom, Mari Morquecho, Adam Wanet, Jessy Marroquín, Samuel Barrios Acevedo, la hermana Paulina Robles, Margarita Ledesma, Johanna Acevedo, Lina Isabel, Iván Delgado y Anthony García. Shabbat Shalom to the ones who greets us from Facebook and those who will listen this recording. Thank you for being here and in this study and time, and thank you for your trust in participating with us. With the favor of the Eternal, we will continue in the live broadcast every first Shabbat of each new biblical month. For now, we have already started the 12th month of the biblical calendar. You can contact us on the social media of Facebook, Instagram, and on the website www.cielosnuevosytierranueva.org, and through our contact number in WhatsApp and Telegram to send your photos and videos to tell us from which country or city you watch us from. Our number is 52 33 28 24 91 85. Well, little friends, in today's delivery we will see how the famine began in Egypt. We will learn from Joseph's intelligence to organize food and to provide sustenance for many people. We will also see how Joseph was reunited with his family, thus understanding the purpose of everything that had happened. Before starting, let's play. Go ahead, Jack.
Thank you, Yoel. Let's pray. Blessed are you, eternal Father, and blessed we are for the Shabbat that you put us to study about your Torah, and that many of the Talmidei are listening and learning about your instruction. Many of us are waiting to listen to today's portion of your weekly bread. And thank you, Father, for the blessings that you put for everyone so that we can be your Talmidei on the authority of your beloved Son, Yeshua. Amen. Go ahead, Angie.
Thank you, Jacques. Shalom, little friends. Greetings from Angie. We are going to start our study with chapter 42 of Bereshit. Due to the famine that we saw in and around Egypt, Jacob sent his sons to get food from Egypt so that they could survive, since in Egypt there was provision that Yossef kept in the 7 years of plenty. Then Yossef's 10 brothers went down to buy wheat in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Yossef's brother, because he was the son whom he hoped could inherit the promise that the Eternal had made to him and the patriarchs. When Yossef's brothers arrived in Egypt, they bowed before him on the ground, thus fulfilling the dream he had of the bundles. In verse 7, we read that Yossef recognized them, but pretended to be a stranger to them by speaking harshly to them. Little friends, can you imagine how difficult that could have been for Yossef? Even so, he remained firm before his brothers so that they would not recognize him. Why do you think Yossef did this? He wanted to see what his brothers' hearts were like at that moment. and if they had changed after what they had done to him before. Yossef puts them to the test and accuses them, saying that they are spies. But they respond by saying, "No, my lord, we only came to buy food. We are sons of one man, and we are honest men." And Yosef continues accusing them, but they tell him that they are 12 brothers, sons of one man in the land of Canaan, and that their younger brother was with him, and that the other, Yosef, was missing, to try to explain that they came from a formal, humble family. But Yosef insists that they are spies, and he put them in prison for 3 days. And on the third day, he told them, "One of you stay in prison, and the rest go and bring food to your house, but you will bring your younger brother, and if you do so, then I will believe what you said." It is here in this part that Yosef's brothers remember the act they had committed by selling him as a slave. Through these tests, Yosef was making them recognize the mistake they had committed, making them reconsider their actions. Little friends, we must always be upright so as not to suffer the consequences of having misbehaved. Yosef took Simeon prisoner and sent the others back with sacks full of wheat and returned their money without them realizing it. Arriving in Canaan, they told Jacob everything that had happened with the Lord of that land. That is how they called Yosef. They told him that they had to take Benjamin with them so that Simeon could return and thus prove that they were honest men. But Yaakov decides not to send Benjamin and tells them that they had deprived him of his children. Yosef no longer existed and Simeon was not there, and now they wanted to take away his son Benjamin, who was the hope he had in the promise of the eternal Father. So Reuben insisted to his father, telling him that he could take the lives of his two sons if something happened to Benjamin or if he didn't come back. But he promised he would return Benjamin back. However, Jacob had gone through a lot before the loss of his son Yosef. A lot after the loss of his son Yosef. And he knew that if he were to lose the only son he had left with his wife Rachel, and in his old age, he might even die of sadness. Talmud Day, before continuing, we see that all this is still part of the Eternal's plan, as well as being part of a consequence for his brothers. Because up to now, we have seen how Yosef went from being a prisoner to ruling Egypt, and how the Eternal has always been with him. And Yosef has acted with integrity. Now the Eternal gives him wisdom to test his brothers after they had mistreated him, thus fulfilling his dreams and a shadow of the Messiah. This has been my little manna for today, little friends. Go ahead, Samuel.
Thank you, Angie. Shalom, dear friends. Greetings from Samuel. Let's continue with chapter 43, in which it explained that Joseph's family, seeing they were running out of grain to feed themselves, had to return to Egypt to buy more. Jacob tells his sons to go to Egypt, but Yehuda reminds them that that man told them that if they will return, they shall come back with their younger brother. His father Jacob asked them why they had brought this evil. But we know that Joseph was interested in knowing if his father was still alive and how his brother Benjamin was treated, if they treated Benjamin like him or if it was different. Yehuda tells his father that he will take care of Benjamin during the trip and to leave their land for Egypt. They decide to bring gift to the governor, who was Joseph. But let us remember that uh, his brother still did not know who that man was. The gifts that would be brought to him were produced in their land. They also took the money that had been put in their sacks on their first trip to Egypt to return it because they thought it was a mistake. And this is how they set out on their journey. When they appear before Joseph, he sees his brother Benjamin and orders his servants to take them to his house to eat. His brothers were afraid. They thought that the cause was because of the money in the sacks and that they were going to make them slaves. Before entering Joseph's house, they told a servant that they had come to return the money that was in their sacks on their first trip, to which the servant replied, "The Elohim of you and your father will have put that treasure in your sacks. I know that I received the money you paid." And Joseph gathered Simon together with his brothers when Joseph arrived. They went down to him and gave him the gift. And he asked them how they were, how their father was, and if he was still alive. They told him that his father was still alive, and when Joseph looked at them, he saw his brother Benjamin, their friends. Here we can see how Joseph's brothers were bearing fruit from a change in their lives after the incident with Joseph. For they loved Benjamin and did not want anything bad to happen to him because they did not want to cause another sadness to their father Jacob. But Joseph was so moved that he left the presence of his brothers and wept. Then he washed his face and ordered the food to be served. The Hebrews were separated from the Egyptians, since for the Egyptians the food of the Hebrews was abominable. And when Joseph's brothers sat down, they were amazed because they were seated in order of their birth, from the oldest to the youngest. Something curious that is stated is that Benjamin's portion of food was much more than that of his brothers. It may be because he was Joseph's brother, son of the same mother. Dear friends, do you remember who the mother of Joseph and Benjamin was? Yes, Rachel, whom Jacob loved very much. So they drank and were happy with their brother Joseph, even without knowing it. They only knew that he was the governor of Egypt. In this second visit to buy more food, this is my little manna for today. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Sammy. Shalom, little friends. Joan greets you. Let's continue with chapter 44 of Bereshit. In the first verses from 1 to 5, we read that Yosef sent the steward of his house and told him, "Fill these men's sacks with food." He also told him to put the money of them in each of their sacks. And Yosef also told him, "You will put my silver cup in the mouth of the sack of the miner, who was Benjamin." And in the morning the men left with their donkeys. And Joseph said to his butler, "Get up and follow those men, and when you reach them, tell them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Why have you stolen my silver cup? Isn't it the one my master drinks from, and by which he usually divines? You have done wrong in what you did.'" Here, when he refers to guessing, he is referring to the interpretations that Yosef made, and it is not that Yosef was a fortune teller, but it was the Eternal who revealed his dreams to him. When he said this, it was so his brothers wouldn't find out his identity yet. From verses 6 to 17, we see that Yosef puts his brothers through one more test, since he wanted to test the hearts of his brothers, to see if they really behaved differently, and if there was already fear of the Eternal in them. When the steward accuses them, they claim to be upright and to not have stolen Yosef's cup. That is why they tell him that whoever the cup is found in would be his slave, because they knew they were innocent. But When they opened their sacks, the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Can you imagine, little friends? For his brothers, this could have been very difficult because it meant that Benjamin was now in Joseph's hands. Benjamin was the hope that Jacob had to receive the blessing that the Eternal had given to Abraham because he believed that Joseph had already died. For this reason, his brothers could not abandon him. This is how we see that Yehudah intercedes for Benjamin and assumes the responsibility, since he had understood that the Eternal had declared them guilty. For this reason, in the remaining verses, he gives an explanation to Yosef of what Benjamin meant to his brother, to his father. He says that Benjamin's soul was united to Jacob's by Abraham's faith in the promise, and for this reason they offer themselves as slaves. Here Yehuda asks for mercy and recognizes Yosef as Pharaoh. Like Yosef, the Messiah represents the eternal. Here we see a prophetic shadow in Yosef. Little friends, with this act of Yehuda, Yosef finishes verifying that his brothers had changed, and we will see what happens in the next chapter. This has been my little manna for today. Go ahead, Anthony.
Shalom, little friends. Greeting from Anthony, and we will be continuing with chapter 45 of Bereshit. Yosef, in the midst of a difficult situation, could no longer contain himself and said, "Everyone, get out of my presence." Once everyone was outside, Yosef cried out to vent, and the whole house of Pharaoh heard him. And he presented himself to his brothers to let them know who he was, and to ask about his father, whom he loved and missed very much. And his brothers did not answer him because they were surprised. Little friends, can you imagine the surprise for his brothers in this situation? And the first thing they would think is, how could it be possible that it was Yosef? Besides the guilty in their conscience, that way could have had them at the moment. Very surprising, right? But Yosef was compassionate. Then Yosef said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. And he said, "I am Yosef, your brother, the one that you sold to the Ishmael. Now you, now you, now then, do not be sad nor have the burden of having sold me. The Eternal planned everything to save the lives of you and others. For there have already been 2 years of famine in the midst of the land of Egypt, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor reaping. And the Eternal sent me before you to preserve the prosperity on earth and to give you food. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but the Eternal who has made me second to Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house and ruler over the land of Egypt. Hurry, go to my father and tell him, 'Thus says your son, Yosef, the Eternal has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come, come to me. Don't stop. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, and you and your children and the children of your children, your cattle and your cows, and all that you have. I will feed there. Therefore, there are still 5 years of famine, so that you and your house, all that you have, do not perish from poverty. And make this known to my father and all the merchants of Egypt, all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father here. And Joseph embraced Benjamin, his brother, and wept, and Benjamin wept too, and he embraced all all his brothers and wept, and this is his brothers talk to him. Little friends, Yosef did not blame them for everything they had done to him. Yosef had already understood that the hand of the Almighty that situate had occurred when his brothers had sold him to some Egyptian merchants. The Eternal transformed difficult adversities into blessings because the Eternal knows the future, and this even was for the blessing of Yaakov and his children, because the Eternal worked through Yosef to supply food in that time of famine. The Eternal in his goodness allowed all this to happen in order to be exalted by Yosef with humility and simply, just like Yeshua, meek and humble. Little friends, tell me day of Yeshua for the Eternal. To work on our pilgrimage, we must be obedient to his commandments and status, and not compliment ourselves with things of the world. Yosef remained upright before the Eternal, and for that reason he was exalted, and his brothers never imagined that their secret would be revealed. You cannot do illicit things in the hidden, because everything will be revealed by our mighty one. And Pharaoh heard Joseph's brother have come, and this pleases the eyes of Pharaoh and his servants. Pharaoh said to Joseph, bring his brothers, and he gave them many gifts and explained to Joseph how they would come to the land of Egypt. To each of them have gave change of garments, and to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And these were his fathers. He sent this 10 donkeys loaded with the best of Egypt, and 10 donkeys loaded with wheat bread and food for his father along the way. And Joseph dismissed his brothers, and they left. And Joseph said to them, do not stop along the way. And they left Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, where Yaakov their father was. And they gave him news, saying, Joseph still lives, and he is the governor of all the land of Egypt. And Yaakov's heart grieved because he did not believe them. And they told him all the words of Joseph which he had spoken to them. And seeing carrots that the carrots that Joseph had sent to him had taken had sent to take him, Yaakov's rule received. Then Yaakov said, Joseph, my son still lives. I will go, I will go, and I will see him before my death. Little friends, can you imagine Yaakov's joy upon receiving this news? His sadness changed to great happiness of seeing his beloved son Yosef again, and understanding that it was a perfect plan of the Eternal to free them from hunger, and thus their descendants could continue according to the promise made to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. This teaches us that we must be whole with the Eternal, keeping all of his instructions, and thus the Father will guide our lives and take care of us in difficult times. Let us remember that for those who love the Eternal, that is, who obey his commandments, all things work for good according to his promise. And this is my little manna for today. Go ahead, Adeline.
Thank you, Anthony. Shalom, dear friends. Greetings from Edeline. Let's continue with chapter 46 of Bereshit, which tell us that Israel took all their belongings and family and went to Beersheba. There, there they made offering to the Eternal, the meek the on of his father Isaac. Then the Eternal spoke to him in visions at night, and called him twice, Jacob, Jacob. And he answered him, Here I am, Hineni. The Eternal told him not to be afraid to go to Egypt, because he would make a great nation out of him, and just as he would enter Egypt, he would come out of it. He also told him that Joseph, his son, would close his eyes, and Jacob arose and his sons took their wives and children and went away in the chariots that Pharaoh had sent to go to Egypt with all their cattle and goods that they had acquired in the land of Canaan. To Egypt. Dear friends, let's remember that the father had told Abraham in a dream, after promising him a son, that his offspring would live in a foreign land and would be embraced for 400 years in Egypt. But he told him not to fear, for the would liberate them, and the time will come when he will jungle those nations, that is Egypt, and those who live in Canaan. Among them, the Amorites, Canaanites, Genesians, Jebusites, Hittites, Rephaims, and others. So with the arrest of Jacob in Egypt, this prophecy will be fulfilled, because alone we see that at first Pharaoh stole Joseph's family. Other time this situation will change. In verse 27, it tells us that there were 70 people in total from the house of Jacob who entered Egypt. In, in the text, it also said that Jacob sent Jehudah to the front to meet with Joseph in the land of Goshen. And, and it also tells us that Joseph received his father, and he lay on his neck and went for a long time. Then Jacob told him that he could die in peace after having seen him. Little friends, can you imagine the emotions of both of them when they meet again after so many years. Well, dear friends, to conclude in verse 34, Joseph is preparing his father and brothers to meet the Pharaoh for the first time. They have come to Egypt to the land of Goshen at the invitation of Pharaoh himself. Bereshit 45, 45, 16, 20. Now that they have arrived, Joseph seemed very concerned that they will present themselves to the Pharaoh as herdsmen and not as merchants of any other industry. Joseph pointed out that the Egyptians did not like herders, so he might be asking them to spy their family's role in raising color as the animals were more respected with, within Egyptian culture. Perhaps Joseph was working to make sure the poor felt comfortable he and his family. And now glad to export the cattle they were bought with them. Perhaps he was starting to assert the Egyptian that the newcomers could support themselves at least after the main and thus Bereshit 45 9 9 9:11. If they were having enough land in Goshen for their flocks, the Egyptian despised cattle raisers, especially because the raising was to us them as food. Some, some think something that the Egyptians did not do because cattle such as rain were objects of working. In any case, Joseph did not hide the relations his father had with the sheep. Rather, he wanted it to be clear they, that they worked as animal breeders. Bereshit 46, 31 to 32. This is how they will describe themselves to Pharaoh in the next chapter. Perhaps what Joseph wanted was to him them their own how space in Goshen, so that they could prosper and continue to live somewhat away from Egyptian culture. Well, little friends, this has been my little manna for today. Go ahead, Tito.
Thank you, Adeline. Shalom, little friends. I am Tito, and we are going to continue with chapter 47 of the book of Bereshit. Let's see what we learned from our patriarch Yaakov. Let's read the verses 1 through 4 that says, Yosef announced to Pharaoh that his father, his brothers, with everything they had arrived in the land of Canaan. He also took 5 of them and brought them before Pharaoh. Then he asked them what was their job, which they replied, We are shepherds of sheep. From our ancestors, we have come to live in this land, because the hunger is big in the land of Canaan. There is no grass for the sheep, therefore we beg you to allow us to live in Goshen. Little friends, it's good that Yosef's brothers were not ashamed of being shepherds, even though they knew that this job was very despised by the Egyptians. Thanks to their sincerity, the Eternal blessed them by making them live in Goshen, far from the idolatrous places of Egypt. This is very important. This is a very important lesson for us to never hide aspects of our lives and be honest in our words. In this way, the Father will bless us at all times. Let's continue reading at verses 5 to 7, which says, Pharaoh then said to Joseph, Your father and your brothers have come to you. Make the best of the land before them, and live in Goshen. And if they are intelligent men, put them as leaders of my cattle. So Joseph took his father and set him before Pharaoh, and Yaakov blessed Pharaoh. Here we can see how Pharaoh was very grateful since he and his kingdom has been enriched by the Eternal through Yosef. Pharaoh surely understood that everything good that happened to him was because the Eternal supports Yosef, and that the same Elohim was also with Yaakov. That's why he gave him the best of the land, and in response Yaakov blessed him. Let's continue reading the verses 8 to 10, which says, Pharaoh asked Yaakov, How many are the years of your life? To which Yaakov replied, They are 130 years. 30 years. They are a they are few and bad because they have not reached the years of my parents. But thus Yaakov left the presence of Pharaoh. Yaakov's life has been very sad. That's why he responds in this way, few and bad. Because in the life of Abraham and Isaac, we don't read as many sad events as in the life of Yaakov. And if we remember, we can count many difficult situations, such as in Ribka's womb, when he was fighting for the birthright, when his when his brother Esau wanted to kill him, when Laban tricks him and exchanges the beloved wife for another, and Sichem when they dishonor Dinah and kill and his sons kills the men of Sichem, and finally when they take away his beloved son, which is Yosef, and lie to him that a wild beast ate him. Poor Yaakov, he had suffered a lot, but he still always obeyed the Eternal. Little friends, even if we go through difficult situations, let us always be faithful just as Yaakov was with our Creator. From verses 11 to 15, it relates that Yosef made them live in the land of Ramses. But as Pharaoh had said, they lacked nothing even though there were no food even though there was no food in the whole country. Meanwhile, in Egypt and Canaan, they fainted because of the hunger. Joseph collected for Pharaoh all the silver that was in the land of Egypt and Canaan, and in exchange for grain. So Joseph put all the silver in the house of Pharaoh. When the silver of Egypt and Canaan ran out, they came to him, saying, Give us bread because the silver has run out. Here we see how all the gold that Egypt possessed, the Eternal gave it to Pharaoh through the intelligence and work of Yosef. This was a gift that the Eternal had given them, but not only did they run out of silver, but they also ran out of animals, as we read from verses 16 to 22. And Yosef said, If you have run out of money, give me your cattle. I will give you bread. If you have run out of money, give me your cattle and I will give you bread. And then they took their cattle to Yosef, and Yosef gave them food. But when that year ended, in addition to the silver, the cattle also ran out. So they had nothing left, and they said to him, Buy us and our lands in exchange for bread. We will be slaves of Pharaoh, but give us seed so that we can live and not die. And so Joseph bought for Pharaoh all the land of Egypt, and all the country became Pharaoh's. But he didn't buy the land of the priests because they ate what Pharaoh gave them. We can see how people of the land were now slaves of Pharaoh as Joseph began to sell all the grain they had saved in years that he had saved in the years of abundance, and thus Yosef bought the bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, because the Egyptians sold all their lands. In verses 23 to 27 says, Yosef said, "Today I have bought you and your lands for Pharaoh in, in exchange for seed to plant, so that when the harvest comes, you will give the fifth part to Pharaoh, and the fourth parts will be for you to plant the field, and your food, and for your food." Then they said, "You have given us life." And thus Yosef established these ordinances over Egypt and Israel. And Israel lived in the country of Egypt and in the land of Goshen, and they fortified and multiplied greatly. We can see how Yosef explained to them what the law was for them, and as we see how Yosef, guided by the Eternal, ruled the nation just wisely and justly, never abused of the people, and was upright in everything he did. In verses 28 says, Yaakov lived in Egypt for 17 years, and the life of Yaakov was 147 years. Little friends, these 17 years of Yaakov in Egypt represented the 17 years that Yosef was when they took him away. Yosef took care of his father for 17 years, just as Yaakov took care of him, instructed and trained in his first 17 years. Verses 29 to 31 says, When Israel was going to die, he called Yosef and said to him, If I if I have found favor with you, give me mercy and truth. I beg you then, do not bury me in Egypt, but when I die with my parents, bury me in their sepulchre. And Yosef answered, Yes, I will. And he said, Swear to me. And he swore. And the patriarchs had received from the Eternal the promise of the resurrection, and they acted by faith. Yaakov understood it, and this why and that is why he wanted to be united with his parents even in death. We will see we will see later how Yosef lived and died in the same with the same hope. Little friends, what we learn in this chapter is the dedication of Yosef in a strange land. In obedience and sanctification. No, the obedience and sanctification is so impressive to the Eternal, so much that he blesses the people on of the earth. In addition, Yosef also took care of his father until he died. And we see how Yaakov, despite living in Egypt his last year, he kept the promise of being resurrection. He kept the promise of being resurrected one day with the coming of the Messiah. Well, little friends, this is how we conclude this delivery of today, Talmud Day of Yeshua. Remember that to review this delivery, we have an activity for you, and do not forget to share your photos and videos in the process of your learning. Shabbat Shalom, little friends. Bye.
Let the children come and come to him. With the Master Yeshua we are going to learn. Let the children come and come to him. Blowing shofar in obedience to him. For the kingdom of heaven of children's is. Let us sing, let us sing, let us sing to Adonai. Come to serve, that your love is with you. In his Torah to walk and never depart. To learn as a child and never lose my faith. 'Cause the kingdom of heaven children come and come to Him. With the Master Yeshua we are going to learn. Let the children come and come to Him. Don't show for art and obedience to Him. God, the kingdom of heaven of children's is. Let us sing to Adonai.